all, good morning and thank you for joining us once again on Smart 24 TV. My name is Fred Makubia. This time around we'll be discussing matters and issues of relationship between Uganda and China. Of course, not forgetting the political status quo of what is happening in the country right now. We understand that China is one of the countries that have been very fundamental towards the development of Uganda. Their relationship has been very fundamental in a sense that each countries benefit from the other. We'll be discussing that with Ambassador Mayega Herny. He is an ambassador of Uganda to China. He's been there for some time. He's been an icon towards the development of these two countries. We'll be discussing matters of China and Uganda. Ambassador, you're welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak about things concerning my country and also China, because that's my relationship in my view has been very, very wonderful.
Okay. Yeah. First of all, we'd like to find who is an ambassador?
Well, ambassador now is a very interesting concept because it comes from, again, the British system, that you have somebody, or Western system, that you have somebody representing his country or her country in another country. And so he speaks for his country in that country where he represents it and defends its image there. That is now the traditional diplomacy that we've had for so many years. Traditional diplomacy didn't include so much of these things to do with trade and tourism and all these kinds of things. Traditional diplomacy was about how do we relate, especially in the political terms. And so that is the sense in which the concept of ambassador or ambassadorship arose, basically to represent your country in another country and protect the interest and then promote the image and all these kinds of things. That was how this concept of ambassadorship.
You've talked about issues of relationship. But first of all, I understand that China is one of the countries that relates so much with Uganda as a country. Let's talk about the status quo of the current relationship between Uganda and China. When we talk about COVID, we cannot really talk about China. So what is the status quo of Uganda and China in terms of maybe trade and related issues?
Very, very interesting, because we must begin at home, how this thing has been developing, because as I said at the beginning of the conversation, that traditional diplomacy meant that you go and defend the image of your country in another country and then promote the interest of that country. Of course, there was a little bit of trade as one of the interests and so on and so forth. Now, things have changed quite remarkably because the emphasis now has shifted into so many other areas, in addition to traditional diplomacy. It talks about the interest my country, which is Uganda, and also the image of my country, which is Uganda, and also representing the president in that country. So those are fundamental things. Now, having said that, to understand, you have to give that the background which I've just given. That's to understand the relationship between Uganda and China. Where is it? Where this relationship between Uganda and China is? I think...
maybe where did it start? You can begin from that.
Absolutely, where did it start? Because you see, it only took 1 week after Uganda got independence for Uganda to open an embassy in Beijing in China. Just 1 week. So independence was like today, and a week after, there was an embassy opened for the Republic of Uganda in China, in Beijing. So, and since that time, so many things have been happening. Of course, at the political level, because the development, the political developments in the country, China has always been interested. But of course, they have the non-interventionist policy. And so they're not going to determine who becomes leader of Uganda or any other country. That is their policy. They don't interfere in the, which is also the policy of Uganda, because there is not that non-interference kind of stand as far as Uganda is concerned. So very important concept to. So that relationship has been cultivated over years, or should I say decades, because you begin to see trade increasing. We are now talking in the region of something like the volume of trade between China and Uganda. We are talking about that volume in the region of something like $800 million as the volume of trade between Uganda and China. Very important. Of course, when it comes to tourism, we've been trying to make inroads in as far as the Chinese tourism industry is concerned, because China, Ugandans would like probably to hear this, contributes, or the volume of tourism in China is something like $150 million tourists, the biggest in the world.
Sure.
China, US follows with something like less than 100, maybe something like 50 million tourists that get out of the US, and so on and so forth. So China contributes 150 million tourists, outbound tourists, to the entire world. Now the question is, how much of this tourism industry in China does Uganda benefit? What is the percentage of that volume of tourism? We've been trying to promote that, and so we've been traveling through all sorts of provinces, because they have 32 in number, provinces in China. Each one of those provinces are probably 10 times, sometimes 20 times, sometimes 30 times bigger an economy than that of Uganda. So we've been really promoting the tourism potential in Uganda in these areas. And this is picking up because at one point in time in Uganda, we have about 70,000 Chinese who are at one point in time present in Uganda. Now, out of those, we can go to the statistics and then find out how many of those are actual tourists. But of course, tourism is also an interesting concept, because you have those who come to see the landscape, you have those who come to see the animals, the flora and fauna. You have even economic tourism. I mean tourists, economic tourists who come here actually to do investment and so on and so forth. Those are also part of tourism, and quite a number of other things. So we've been trying to promote that as much as possible. Now, trade, I've spoken about it. The volume is in the region, about 800 million US dollars, and tourism is also developing. But then you can also look at the infrastructure projects that China has carried out in this country. You can't be oblivious of that. But before I even go into that, I think one point which I want to make is that China now is the biggest contributor of foreign direct investment to Uganda. Yeah. With because it's doing probably something like almost 90% of the infrastructure projects that we have running in the country.
And how do we measure that? How do we measure that?
Well, the measurement is done by,
the reality of that.
Of course, the measurement is done by economists, the Ministry of Finance, and so on and so forth. Because what you do is you get the total amount of FDIs that flow into the country from all sorts of places, including Kenya, our neighbors, in other words, in Africa, and then Europe, and then the Americas, and so on and so forth. Now, out of that total foreign direct investment that comes through from abroad, China accounts for almost 90% of that.
Okay.
Got all the major infrastructure projects, they're done by Chinese companies. I mean, you just go to the Albertine Graben, where the oil is supposed to flow, or to spill soon. The Chinese are there. You look at the road network that is developing in the country, the Chinese are there. Hopefully, the SGR will also take off the standard gauge railway. If it takes off, of course, China has a big interest in that, and so on and so forth. I mean, going back to the oil industry, you are aware of a company from China called Sinuk. It is very instrumental in those things, and I hear it has teamed up with Total to do the pipeline up to Tanga in Tanzania. So China is a very big friend of Uganda, and as far as the economics or the economy of Uganda is concerned, it has been a very big contributor to the economy of the Republic of Uganda.
One would want to know maybe why China? Why China to a great extent? Uganda is dealing so much with China. Why? To that great extent.
Well, because you see...
What is that unique that China has that has moved with it for quite this long?
You see, the Chinese policy is very interesting. It takes us back to the non-interventionist policy. Whereas the FDIs that come from the West, the Western countries, speak about the Americas, speak about Europe, speak about the rest of the Western world. Most of that support that comes in terms of economics, it is always laced with conditions that you must have this, you must have democracy, you must have all this. Of course, having democracy is something that is very fundamental and it's very good. You must have democracy. So, in other words, it's what in economics we call strings attached. Okay. But when it comes to Chinese investment that comes through into the country, those strings attached are almost absent. And so that's why the concentration, not only of Uganda, but also of other African countries, including actually European countries and Latin American countries, found it so easy to deal with Chinese authorities or China as a country in terms of upping the economics of these respective countries. It has been, China is very instrumental. The other day, President Xi of China visited, I think about 2 years ago, it's coming to 2 years, since he visited the UK. And the UK was, of course, planning to have a huge nuclear reactor, and it was supposed to cost 50 billion US dollars. And the Chinese offered that to the British. So you can see the Chinese going around the world because they have the money anyway. They have the money, and the strings attached to that money for purposes of investment are not as stringent as the support that comes from elsewhere.
Don't you think we are blinded by the large sums of money which you have put here? Don't you think we are blinded by the large sums of money and we are afraid to concentrate on other issues that could benefit Uganda more? Maybe as an ambassador.
Well, I don't want to say that we are blind or have been blinded by Chinese support, because, I mean, who doesn't, for instance, need roads? Who doesn't need these airports? Who doesn't need the standard gauge railway, which is supposed to reduce the cost of doing trade between Uganda and the rest of the world? Who doesn't want there are so many things in which the Chinese are involved. Who doesn't want to have an economy that is actually vibrant, which the Chinese are also supporting? Who doesn't want that? And that's why the entire world is actually very, very excited about Chinese support. I've been visiting the US, for instance, a number of times. But whenever I go to the US, I prefer to eat from Chinese restaurants, because the Chinese restaurants are actually...
Maybe because you're an ambassador to China.
Well, I don't know, but I also like Chinese food.
Would you probably eat from a different...
I would, and I have done, actually. I have done that in the US, but in the majority of cases, because the Chinese are also investing in the US very, very, very heavily. In terms of restaurants, in terms of railways, in terms of all sorts of things. They've been getting contracts there. So Chinese support to the entire world, I think, in my view, has been very, very fundamental in as far as stabilizing the international economy.
Could this be the factor that explains the reason why they're given more tax holiday than probably more of any other Uganda?
But it's all about economic wisdom. And I don't want to call it financial wisdom. Economic wisdom that works. Conventional economic wisdom that you want to attract investment. Yes, we have capacity to do quite a number of projects, but do we have, for instance, the capacity to do the standard gauge railway? We don't have. We don't have. What the government of Uganda has been doing is to get particular individuals from, for instance, from the UPDF to go to China and study how to do the standard gauge railway. I went to officiate at that function at a university called Shijiazhuang University in the province of Hebei. And there were, I think, about 13 UPDF officers who had been to that university to study how because that university started as in China. It started in China as a railway construction company, and then eventually translated into and the UPDF, and I mean the Chinese army actually was the one running that company. And so everybody who used to do the railways in China, including the current railways, the genesis is from that university. So this university gave us an opportunity as UPDF to train 13. I don't know whether another cohort has been sent to that university to study how to do. So you can see the benefits. And so who is this going to reject this kind of offer that China is giving you, that you bring your people so that we train them to develop your capacity so that in the future, for instance, you can do your own railways rather than relying on the international community to provide these kinds of things. And the Chinese have been doing these things. And they are also interested in helping Uganda to do this gear. It has so far done quite a number of, a big percentage in terms of, because the Chinese have always emphasized connectivity. Because Uganda can do the SGR. If Kenya doesn't do it, then it doesn't make sense. So this is a regional project. The Kenyans are doing it, and so Uganda is also supposed to do it, so that we up the the economic game, and the economies of the region begin to perform better in terms of reducing the cost of doing business. And so the Chinese are very instrumental. Who are we to reject? Why would you reject? That's giving them, in my view, giving them tax holidays is not a problem, because that then would encourage them to bring in more investments.
The greatest debt that Uganda has, probably with many other countries, is emerging from China. Doesn't this worry us as Ugandans?
Well, the debt is manageable, but at least according to the statistics from the Ministry of Finance, is that we have not hit the ceiling. We haven't hit the roof in as far as borrowing is concerned. And so the borrowing, yes, it has been done, but also with very good terms that the Chinese are giving. And so, because
what are
the
terms as an ambassador, what are these good terms?
The good terms, for instance, the interest rates have been as low as possible to encourage African countries, including Uganda, to borrow from the Chinese. So, whereas the loans from elsewhere have been extremely expensive, those from China have been less expensive in terms of interest, in terms of also strings attached. Because you see, strings attached are looked at as if they are non-monetary. Yeah, fine, which is okay. But when somebody begins to interfere with your politics because it's giving a loan, then that source of support, I think, becomes a reject, in my view. But the Chinese, no strings attached, because we shouldn't look at only the interest rate that is charged on the loan that is being given to a country, or to Uganda to be specific, but rather also at other things which the Chinese or which lenders actually insist on, so that they give you a loan. And China does not become terribly insistent on those kinds of strings attached.
Uganda is adopting a principle called Buy Uganda, Build Uganda, where we want to resort to doing things in our own country than getting them from other countries. And we understand that China is one of the countries that contributes a lot to our economy. So doesn't this policy interfere in some of the strings that we have put between these two countries? If we adopt the principle of Buy Uganda, Build Uganda, doesn't this destabilize our relations between Uganda and other countries, most importantly China?
I think a mix of the two is not a problem. For instance, of course, there is already a symbiotic relationship between China and Uganda. I don't know whether people in this country know that actually mangoes from this place are being packed in the Kapeka Industrial Park and put in tins and then exported to China. And when the Chinese eat those mangoes, they don't want to eat mangoes from elsewhere. So it's a symbiotic relationship. Yes, buy Uganda, but if in that buying Uganda and whatever, the concept you have brought up, involves us doing it with friends who are not necessarily Ugandans, I don't see a contradiction in as far as that is concerned, because the Chinese are also here and they are eating our own things. But part of those things that they are producing here are also exported to China. And so we get foreign exchange, which is badly needed for other projects in the country. Okay. So I don't see a problem with doing a mix of Buy Uganda, do what? Buy Uganda,
Build Uganda.
Buy Uganda, Build Uganda.
Uganda
Absolutely. Buy Uganda, Build Uganda, a mix of that one, and also having friends that come from abroad to help us do exactly that. I don't see a problem. Unless we come to a point where the mix becomes disproportionately in favor of the Chinese. Once it comes to that point, then it becomes a problem.
Okay. Yeah. You cannot talk about China in the present situation, times like now, and you don't talk about the pandemic.
First of all, China is a very big country. It's not like Uganda. Uganda is just one of the smallest provinces in China, should I say, so to speak. And so China is a very big country. Even the Chinese themselves, I doubt whether they knew. In fact, heads had to roll when the problem began to unfold. I remember hearing about, for instance, mayors losing their jobs in the province of Wuhan, where the problem started, where we also had 70 students, university students doing university education there. And so prediction was difficult, because even the Chinese themselves couldn't predict it, because it took them unaware. And Wuhan is very far away from Beijing, where we stay. Of course, one would say that since you are representing Uganda in that country, you should know all sorts of things in that country. But you see,
one would say as an ambassador, you should have.
Absolutely, I agree. But so are the Americans affected, so are the Europeans affected, and the rest of the African countries and Latin American countries. It has become a global pandemic, and it caught everybody unaware. Not only us as Ugandans or representatives of the Republic of Uganda and China, but the rest of the world was caught unaware, including the Chinese themselves. The Chinese authorities were caught unaware when this problem actually emerged. And therefore, I don't want to point blames as to who didn't do what and all those kinds of things, because this problem came and it affected the entire world, because you cannot say, in fact, you can compare yourselves. For instance, we as Uganda as a country, yes, we represent this country there, but there are also Americans who have quite a number of consulates. We have one consulate and one embassy in China, but the Americans have consulates in so many places, but also they couldn't know that this thing was coming. We don't have, as a country, Uganda does not have a consulate in Wuhan, but the Americans do. Okay. Yeah, so they should have known, but they didn't know, So, and China is a very big country, as I've said, because to, for instance, fly from the northernmost part of China to the southernmost part of China, it can take about 5 hours. So you can see the extent. And yet flying between northern Uganda and southern Uganda, probably that will take you something like about less than 30 minutes, maybe 20 minutes or something like that. So compare that with what China is in terms of size. So it's a very big, and I don't want to say that we are incapacitated in as far as having information about what happens in the various parts of China. No, but this is something that came through, just like Ebola here, because now you cannot say that the Americans were caught unaware when Ebola broke out in Uganda, and all these other things we've been having breaking out in this country. So it becomes difficult when it comes to those kinds of things. Yeah.
So maybe when it comes to how we are managing the pandemic, we've had lots of issues happening with our university students that subscribe to the education system that side. What is now the status quo?
Well,
A lot of things have been happening on social
absolutely,
media.
yeah.
And you should have information as an ambassador
Yeah.
of the status quo, particularly with the students and people that do a lot of business, and even those that stay within China.
That's right.
That are Ugandans.
That's right. Fortunately, what has happened in China since this problem began is that unless there is a new case, I'm not aware of a case of a Ugandan who was caught or contracted COVID-19. That one I haven't heard about any case of that kind of thing. But you should also understand that, for instance, when it comes to Ugandan students who are studying in China, the last count that we did, there were 800 throughout China, spread out throughout China, and doing university education. And of course, there is also business community, which in most cases goes to Guangzhou to do business. And so I think, in my view, things, first of all, China has brought that pandemic under control. The statistics coming out from there is that the majority of the cases of COVID-19 are actually imported cases, people who come from abroad, the ones who come with that. That's why recent, as far back as 2 weeks, the Chinese have become they have actually imposed more restrictions on people who go to China. For instance, if I have to travel from here to go to China, first of all, the flights have been cancelled. But initially, for you to travel, you would have to test here, and then in Uganda, and then test at the transit point. For instance, if it is Dubai, if it's Nairobi, if it's Sababa, and so on and so forth, you'd have to test again. And that would mean that, for instance, a journey which is supposed to take you most likely 1.5 days takes you probably something like a week or even more. Because, like for me, if I'm to go to Beijing, I definitely would have to take a test here, then go to Nairobi and probably stay for 4 days to take a test and then get the results. Then I board again, and then I fly to Guangzhou. I don't go because I work in Beijing. So I would have to fly to Guangzhou or Shanghai. Most people who are coming from Africa have been going to Guangzhou. And then in Guangzhou, I would be quarantined for 14 days. Now those are 18 days. Then from Guangzhou, I would have to travel to Beijing, and then I would be quarantined for a week, which brings it 21 days. So that kind of travel is extremely, not only expensive, but also very lengthy in terms of time. But it is because the Chinese have decided to become very strict so that imported cases are restricted as much as possible, or are reduced as much as possible. And so it has become very difficult. But as far as the 70 students, because that is the interest of Ugandans who are in Wuhan, they went through the problem very well because none of them got affected or infected. And the government of Uganda, as you remember, after consultations, money was sent to look after them as an upkeep. And all the students, as far as I remember the report which came through, is that they got their money. Those who were eligible got the money. And then I think they went through that very difficult time because that's the place, the epicenter of the epidemic in Wuhan. They went through the most difficult time.
So what do we learn out of this? What do we learn out of this in terms of China-Uganda relations? What does this pandemic teach us as Ugandans and at the same time as China, as people from China?
Most important is collaboration, working together. Extremely important. Coexistence, collaboration, and so on and so forth. Because when you share these experiences and you work together, the Chinese have, for instance, brought here a hospital, and they have stocked it with all sorts of drugs against COVID, and they're working together with our own medical technical teams and sharing information how to control this thing. And most of these SOPs, which are traveling in Chagulanya and Emuriat, as a result of that collaboration, because the Chinese have been sharing information as to how, because they have controlled it in China, as to how this pandemic can be controlled. Extremely. So collaboration, working together, coexistence are very big lessons, especially when it comes to controlling these pandemics. Because if you don't do that, the thing is affecting the entire world. In the past, the pandemic would happen in Uganda and it would stop there because there was no international travel in the past during our Jaja's times. These days, because of very quick travel, very fast travel, millions traveling in a day. The spread of disease is a very big problem. So working together is extremely important, and I think that's a very big lesson.
When you talk about the Chagulanyi and the armament, I am not hesitant now to open the discussion to what is happening in the country, the political situation in the country. Uganda is a country that puts politics more than the economics. I do not know whether you agree with my school of thought. What explains this? Other countries like US, other countries like China, which you earlier on pointed on, put economics more than politics. In Uganda, it is a different case. And technocrats like you, maybe, I am thinking, yes, you've done something to make sure that this changes, and it hasn't. We put politics more than economics. What explains this?
Big mistake, because the Chinese, for instance, don't emphasize politics. They emphasize economics. And that's why from the 70s, when they were very poor, they didn't even have food to eat, have done economic miracles for their country. And China now is number 2 in terms of size of the economy. It follows the US. In the US, there is also a lot of politics. If the Americans, for instance, could scale down their involvement in politics, because they are always in election mode all the time, probably their economy would be twice as much as that of China, or something like that, and so on and so forth. But anyway, in Uganda here, I think we are making a very big mistake, because we are doing much more politics than doing the economics. And then people waste a lot of time, and at the end of the day, they begin crying of poverty and all this kind of, because the emphasis is on politics.
Why?
Very interesting. Again, an example from China, for instance, and I'm not trying to say that, suggested that the Chinese model should be brought to Uganda.
But we can pick a leaf from there.
We can do even a hybrid between what happens in the West in terms of democracy and what happens in China. We can do a hybrid between the two, and then we implement it according to our own conditions here. But in China, Parliament, for instance, sits for only 2 weeks in a year. They come in the first week of February and the second week. They get the progress reports from the President Xi or any other president, and then the Prime Minister and so on and so forth. They look at the policies. Some of them probably require little bits of amendment and so on and so forth, and then they also pass new laws or amend the existing laws in those 2 weeks. They've done all those things and they go away. And once they go, because each one of these members who are in the region of 3,000 in number, goes away because they have their own professions, because you have the army there, you have the doctors, you have the teachers, you have farmers, you have business people, and so on and so forth. All of them coming to do good for their country, but only for 2 weeks. So whether you people in Uganda adopt that, that is our choice. Or we remain with the American system, or of the West, we remain with the Western system of having a parliament sitting the whole year, fine, that is still our choice. But for me, in my view, I would want to see a situation where we do a hybrid between the two. Like, for instance, when you go to South Africa, members of parliament are not elected in their constituencies. What is elected in the constituencies is a party. And so the party which gets more of the vote is the one which has more. Then the party appoints those who go to parliament. So isn't that interesting for this country? And so also to bring down, for instance, the cost of doing politics and elections and so on and so forth.
So, Ambassador, would be better. We can't do away with politics.
I think how would be better. The system is looking for a hybrid that works for Uganda, because the Chinese have looked for what has worked for them. The Americans also have what has worked for them. The South Africans are having something that is working for them. I think in Uganda we must lessen the politics that we do, in my view, because the politics becomes too much. It's as if we're going to eat politics. We don't eat politics, we eat economics, because economics brings money into your pockets. Politics, I don't know whether it brings money in your pockets, but as far as I'm concerned, I know
maybe
it's economics.
The members of parliament does. To people like us who wake up in the morning.
Well, but I've not seen somebody becoming a tycoon by being a member of parliament. I had my own brother, the late Peter Nyombe, who was an MP, but he went there with his money. But he never became a tycoon as a result of him becoming a member of parliament. But when you do right economics, you talk about these moguls that we have in town, the Sudiris and so on and so forth, and also the indigenous ones, who are doing business, very good business in this country, and they're making fortunes, they're making money. They have much more money than members of parliament. So in parliament, yes, you can have some level of comfort as a result of the allowances that you get. But I think what we need to do in this country is to lessen the amount of politics that we do, because it has become too much. Everyone is a politician, wheelbarrow pushers are politicians, teachers are politicians, everybody is doing politics, and not politicians, part-time politicians, but full-time politicians. And in so doing, in my view, we are injuring our country.
Okay. And then maybe the political gear is on the way. What does this mean to the economy?
We always suffer, but of course, I think this time we always suffer after elections because there is a lot of inflation because so much money has been spent when it comes to elections. But this time, I'm seeing the Minister of Finance really controlling expenditure, and I just want to believe that the kinds of things that we went through in 2011 and 2016, most especially 2011, when there was so much money spent during those elections and there was hyperinflation. So, but the Minister of Finance has done the correct thing this time, because they're saying they're going to control expenditure during this period of time. Unfortunately, or unfortunately, actually both fortunately and unfortunately, we're not doing these big rallies that used to consume a lot of money. So we are meeting small groups, apart from these two individuals, Chagulanya and Amuriat, who are breaking the SOPs and the guidelines issued by the EC. So, in my view, this election is supposed to be cheaper than the previous elections that we had.
And how do we end ourselves avoiding the mistakes we've done in the past, so that we go through this system very well, the economy is not challenged negative, one or the other. So how do we avoid some of these mistakes?
The mistake, of course, is one of them is what we have just talked about. The Minister of Finance is doing the right thing. Control expenditure as much as possible so that we don't just get out of this election, because there will be a Uganda after elections.
That is
yeah. It's going to be there. Ugandans are also going to be there. So given the fact that Uganda is going to be there and Ugandans are going to be there, control expenditure, let people not think that the end of the world has come, or the roof of the house has collapsed, the bottom of the tap is gone out, and all these kinds of things. Let's not behave as if the world is coming to an end because the election is, because this election is only the 14th of January. And after that one, people will go back to their normal lives, and then we'll do the right things, and the economics and all these kinds of things. And also, we need to project a good image of our country towards the international community. Because if people are burning tires all over the place and all these kinds of things, those are a discouragement to people who want to come here and invest. Because if they see people burning tires and those kind of things, like the ones which happened yesterday, those definitely do not project a good image for the country.
Your final remarks. The most important words of a man are his last words. What is your final remarks? First of all, to the relations between Uganda and China, and most importantly, your political message as we head towards 2021 all.
About China and Uganda, in terms of relationship, I think we should just cultivate that relationship even further, because there are quite a number of things we're supposed, especially if we can see through that project of the standard gauge railway. It will do miracles for this country, as far as I can see. So the relationship between China and Uganda should be cultivated even further, so that we can tap into the economic capacity of China, and then we'll do even more projects. That is number two, the politics, because we are moving towards elections. Let people observe the SOPs and also observe the guidelines that were issued by the Electoral Commission, so that at the end of these elections, we don't have more infections. If you look at, for instance, the elections which had just been concluded in the US, a day after those elections, you remember they registered 100,000 new cases of COVID-19 as a result of huge rallies. So why can't these two individuals really borrow a leaf from what has been happening in many of these other countries?
And whom do we blame, maybe, sorry to engage you further, whom do we blame? Do we blame the masses, or we blame the candidates?
No, but you see, because you must make a distinction, because there are people who are called leaders. But if they don't lead, they become misleaders. But there are people who are also called misled. If Amuriat and Chagulanyi come out openly and they say they are going to do open rallies and processions against the guidelines that were issued by the Electoral Commission and against the SOPs that were issued by the Minister of Health, then I'm not surprised they're facing the music which they're facing at the moment with the security forces, because you are just aiding and abetting the spread of the pandemic.
As we wind up.
Yeah. My name is Ambassador Herny Mayega. I've been working as Deputy Head of Mission of the members of Uganda and China for the last 5 years. And I just want to appeal to Ugandans that, yes, we are moving towards elections, and that we should stay calm, we should observe the SOPs, we should also observe the guidelines that were issued by the Electoral Commission, because after these elections there is going to be a Uganda, there is going to be a country worth its name, there is going to be harmony, and so there is life even after elections. So we shouldn't behave as if there is no tomorrow. There is going to be tomorrow even after elections. It's extremely important that we observe the SOPs, we observe the guidelines that were issued by the Electoral Commission, because we need Ugandans to be healthy. We don't want to spread the disease of COVID-19. We don't want it to spread in the country. So it's very important that people observe SOPs and the guidelines that were issued by the Electoral Commission.
Well, dear viewer, thank you for being part and parcel of this broadcast. We have been discussing matters of Uganda and China. Is our relationship between Uganda and China symbiotic or parasitic? Symbiotic in the sense that both parties benefit from the other and causing no harm. Parasitic in the sense that one party is benefiting from the other. According to the ambassador, it seems to be that both parties are benefiting from the other. But on the political side, his final remarks was, why can't we work together, respect the standard operative procedure? That will be one of the avenues through which I'll be able to go through this period successfully. Uganda will remain. My name is Fred Makubia.